You may think this story is fictional, but it actually happened. A mother's love is often pure and unconditional, but this story will change that belief. What could drive a mother to trade her own daughters for drugs? Why would she hand them over to a 78-year-old man with horrifying intentions? What became of these innocent children? Welcome to True Crime Chronicles. I thank you, my subscribers and viewers, for your unwavering support as we continue to share daily reported and unreported true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. I love you. Morgan Summerlin's life was full of challenges and bad decisions. She grew up in a home where things were often unstable, and this followed her into adulthood. From a young age, she saw how hard life could be when people struggled to get by, and she learned that survival sometimes came before having hopes and dreams. When she became an adult, Morgan's life stayed difficult. She got caught up in addiction, which took control of her choices and relationships. Her drug use created a cycle of problems, leading her to make decisions that hurt not only herself but also those around her. The people in her life often shared the same struggles, making things even harder for her. Instead of finding support, Morgan's relationships fed into her addiction and made it worse. Her struggles with drugs didn't just affect her. They shaped how she lived and set her on a path that would end in tragedy. Even with the chaos in her life, Morgan became a mother to 2 young daughters. These girls loved their mother deeply, and like any children, they looked to her for care and safety. But Morgan's addiction made it hard for her to focus on being a parent. Her struggles with drugs took over, and she couldn't give her daughters the stable life they needed. The girls grew up in a home where neglect was part of their everyday life. They often had to take care of themselves and lived in an environment shaped by their mother's problems. Despite their innocence, they were pulled into the darkness of Morgan's addiction. Things got even worse when Morgan made a choice that no one could imagine, a choice that would change their lives forever. Morgan's daughters were remarkable children. Despite the instability in their lives, they were bright, curious, and full of hope. The older girl had a natural kindness about her, always looking out for her younger sister and trying to find small moments of joy in their daily lives. She was wise for her age, often stepping into the role of a caretaker when her mother wasn't able to. The younger daughter was playful and energetic, always eager to laugh and find fun in even the smallest things. Together, the 2 girls had a bond that was unshakable, a bond built on trust and the shared understanding of their difficult reality. They were resilient in ways no children should have to be. Even when their lives were filled with uncertainty, they showed incredible strength and a deep sense of innocence. Their laughter could fill a room, and their dreams were as big as any child's dreams should be. They talked about the things they wanted to do when they grew up: go to school, travel, and live in a safe, happy home. But behind their smiles was a quiet courage. They were just trying to survive in a world where the people meant to protect them had failed them so many times. While the girls had moments of joy and hope, their day-to-day life was shaped by the harsh realities of their mother's addiction. Their home was chaotic and unsafe. There was rarely enough food on the table, and sometimes they would go to bed hungry. The lights might get shut off because the bills weren't paid, and their clothes were often worn and too small. The house itself was in disarray, reflecting the neglect that had become part of their lives. Friends or family rarely visited, and when strangers came around, it was rarely a good sign. Their mother's addiction brought dangerous people into their lives. The girls often had to stay in the same room as unfamiliar adults who made them feel uncomfortable and unsafe. Arguments, loud noises, and unpredictable behavior were common in the home. There was no routine, no sense of stability, and no one to shield them from the dangers that surrounded them. They learned to adapt quickly, reading the mood of the adults around them to know whether it was a good day or a bad one. Despite all this, they clung to each other, finding comfort and strength in their sisterly bond. The world outside their home wasn't much better. The girls didn't always feel they could trust the adults in their neighborhood or at school to help them. They rarely spoke about what was going on at home, partly because they didn't think anyone would believe them, and partly because they were too young to understand that what they were going through wasn't normal. For them, this was just life, a life they hoped would one day change for the better. But as much as they tried to hold on to their innocence, the environment they were forced to live in left its mark. They had to grow up faster than they should have, learning lessons about survival and pain that no child should ever have to learn. Their home was supposed to be a place of love and safety, but instead, it became a constant reminder of the challenges they faced. Despite this, the girls still dreamed, still laughed, and still believed that one day, things could get better. Their spirit, even in the face of so much hardship, was a testament to their strength. Morgan's addiction drove her to unimaginable decisions. Struggling with her dependency and desperation for drugs, she turned to Richard Office, a 78-year-old man. Morgan began using her 2 young daughters as a means of payment, trading their innocence in exchange for drugs. This was not a single act of desperation, but a repeated and deliberate choice. Each time this happened, it was another betrayal of her daughter's trust and innocence. Her addiction clouded her judgment, but the impact of these actions left deep emotional and physical scars on the children. These acts of betrayal would forever change the lives of the 2 girls, who relied on their mother for safety and love, only to be exposed to unimaginable harm. Richard Office played a central role in this devastating crime. He exploited Morgan's desperation and took advantage of the children. During these exchanges, he inflicted irreparable harm upon the young girls. His actions were a violation not just of their innocence, but of basic humanity. This situation underscored the terrifying consequences of Morgan's addiction, where her choices and Office's actions created a cycle of harm and pain. While Morgan's addiction may have pushed her into these decisions, Office's deliberate involvement magnified the tragedy. His role in the abuse left scars that would take a lifetime to heal, highlighting the horrifying reality of how vulnerable children can be in such circumstances. It began with a moment of bravery that would forever change the course of these young girls' lives. After enduring years of neglect and unimaginable pain, the 2 sisters found the courage to share their story. It wasn't easy for them to speak out. They were just children, burdened by secrets far too heavy for their young shoulders to carry. But deep down, they knew they couldn't keep silent any longer. Their decision to tell the truth marked the first step toward ending their nightmare and seeking justice. One day, the older sister, tired of living in fear, decided to confide in an adult she felt she could trust. Whether it was a teacher, a counselor, or a family friend, this person represented safety, someone who could finally help them. With trembling hands and a quiet, shaky voice, the older sister began to describe what had been happening to them. She spoke of the strange man who visited their home, the unsettling things he did, and the way their mother had allowed it to happen. At first, the words came out hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure she'd be believed. But once she started, it was as though a dam had broken. The younger sister, too, began to share her experiences, adding her own voice to the account. The details the girls revealed were horrifying. They spoke of their mother, Morgan, who had used them as currency to satisfy her drug addiction. They described the visits to the home of a man named Richard Office, a 78-year-old who would give their mother drugs in exchange for access to the girls. The memories were painful, and yet, these young children found the strength to speak about them, describing events no child should ever have to endure. Their voices were filled with both fear and relief. Fear of what might happen next, but relief that someone finally knew the truth. The adult they confided in listened carefully, heartbroken and horrified by what the girls were saying. It was clear that these weren't just wild stories or exaggerated claims. Their words carried the weight of painful, lived experiences. The adult wasted no time in taking action. This was no longer a situation that could be ignored or dismissed as a family matter. What these girls had been through required immediate intervention, and the authorities needed to be involved. Once the authorities were notified, things began to move quickly. Law enforcement officials recognized the seriousness of the allegations and immediately opened an investigation. The first step was to ensure the safety of the 2 girls. They were removed from their mother's care and placed in a secure environment where they could be protected. This act alone was a monumental moment for the sisters. For the first time in a long while, they were in a place where they didn't have to be afraid. As detectives began their work, they sat down with the sisters to hear their story in full detail. Specially trained officers, skilled in working with children, created a safe space for the girls to share their experiences. They encouraged the sisters to speak openly, reassuring them that they were no longer alone in this fight. The older sister, who had always felt a sense of responsibility for her younger sibling, spoke with surprising maturity. She recounted the repeated visits to Richard Office's home, the fear they felt, and the way their mother seemed indifferent to their suffering. The younger sister, though quieter, supported her sibling's account, adding details that made the picture even clearer. The information the girls provided was deeply disturbing, but it was also crucial in building a case against their mother and Richard Office. Investigators began gathering evidence to corroborate the girls' accounts. They visited the places the sisters mentioned, including Office's home, and searched for physical evidence that could support the charges. They also interviewed neighbors, teachers, and anyone else who might have noticed signs of abuse or neglect. Each piece of evidence brought them closer to understanding the full scope of what had happened. Word of the investigation began to spread, and the community was shocked by what they heard. People who knew Morgan Summerlin expressed disbelief and outrage. How could a mother betray her children in such a way? How could something so horrific happen right under their noses? The case became a rallying point, sparking discussions about the responsibilities of adults to protect children and the importance of reporting suspected abuse. Vigils were held to show support for the girls, with neighbors and strangers alike offering prayers and messages of hope for their healing. For the girls, speaking out was a turning point in their young lives. They had lived in silence for too long, carrying the weight of their trauma alone. Now, with the support of law enforcement and their community, they had a chance to reclaim their voices and begin the process of healing. Their courage in coming forward not only set the wheels of justice in motion, but also inspired others who heard their story. It was a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, bravery and truth could light the way forward. Once the young girls bravely shared their story, law enforcement wasted no time in launching a full-scale investigation. Detectives worked tirelessly to gather evidence and confirm the accounts provided by the children. The details of the abuse were carefully documented, and investigators combed through every lead to ensure they had a clear picture of what had occurred. Morgan Summerlin, their mother, was arrested quickly after the investigation began. Authorities uncovered undeniable proof of her role in orchestrating the horrific exchanges with Richard Office. Soon after, Office himself was apprehended. His involvement was confirmed through physical evidence and the testimonies of the children. Surveillance records, witness statements, and forensic findings all came together to support the girls' accounts. The speed and precision with which law enforcement acted reflected the seriousness of the case. Their goal was not only to ensure that justice was served, but also to provide safety and closure to the two young girls who had endured so much. The authorities' determination showed their commitment to holding both Morgan and Office accountable for their actions. The revelations of the case sent shockwaves through the community. News of the abuse and betrayal spread quickly, leaving neighbors, teachers, and other community members in disbelief. People who had interacted with Morgan and her children couldn't comprehend how such horrific events had been taking place in their midst. Outrage grew as more details of the case emerged. The idea that a mother could trade her children for drugs, combined with the calculated abuse by a much older man, was enough to stir a collective demand for justice. Vigils were held for the children, with many offering prayers and support for their recovery. Community leaders spoke out about the importance of protecting vulnerable children and ensuring such tragedies never happened again. Organizations and individuals came forward, offering counseling and resources for the girls to begin healing. The outrage also spurred conversations about the broader issues of child abuse, neglect, and the dangers of unchecked addiction. It was clear that this case had left an indelible mark on everyone who heard it, uniting the community in its call for accountability and change. During the investigation, Morgan Summerlin faced intense questioning from law enforcement. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Testimonies from her daughters, corroborating witnesses, and other forms of proof left little room for denial. Under pressure, Morgan eventually admitted to her role in trading her daughters to Richard Office in exchange for drugs. Her confession sent shockwaves through the investigation team and the public alike. The reality of her actions was devastating to hear. She explained that her addiction had driven her to desperation, but this reasoning offered no comfort to those grappling with the enormity of what had happened. She betrayed her daughters in the worst possible way, prioritizing her need for drugs over their safety and well-being. Investigators were left with questions that were almost impossible to answer. How could a mother make such a decision? What had gone through her mind as she handed her daughters over to a man like Office? For the public, Morgan's admission solidified the deep sense of betrayal and horror that had surrounded the case. The trust between a parent and child, something so sacred, had been completely shattered. Not long after Morgan's confession, Richard Office was taken into custody. The 78-year-old man showed no signs of remorse for his actions. During questioning, he maintained a cold and detached demeanor, refusing to acknowledge the harm he had caused. His lack of emotion only fueled the public's anger, painting a chilling picture of a man who exploited the vulnerability of both the children and their mother. Investigators pieced together the timeline of his involvement, uncovering the repeated exchanges that took place between him and Morgan. The details of his crimes were harrowing, and the evidence against him was undeniable. Surveillance footage, witness accounts, and forensic analysis all pointed to his guilt. Despite this, Office offered no apology or justification for what he had done. His silence and lack of empathy left a lasting impression on everyone involved in the case. The public reaction to Office's arrest was swift and unforgiving. As news outlets reported his capture, people expressed their outrage on social media and in community gatherings. The idea that a man of his age could commit such heinous acts against children was unfathomable. His arrest marked a critical step in the journey toward justice, but it did little to soothe the collective grief and anger of those following the case. For the investigators, securing the arrests of both Morgan and Office was just the beginning. The legal process that followed would become a fight for accountability and a search for answers to questions that may never truly be resolved. After the arrests of Morgan Summerlin and Richard Office, the legal proceedings began. Both faced serious charges that reflected the gravity of their actions. For Morgan, the charges included cruelty to children, reckless endangerment, and facilitation of abuse. Her role in trading her daughters to Richard Office for drugs made her culpable for the unimaginable harm they endured. In court, Morgan pleaded guilty. Her confession, combined with the overwhelming evidence against her, left no room for doubt. The judge, in delivering the sentence, remarked on the sheer betrayal and failure of her duties as a mother. Morgan was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a punishment meant to reflect the severity of her betrayal. The court acknowledged the role her addiction played in her decisions, but it did not excuse her actions. Her daughters had trusted her for safety and love, yet she had chosen to exploit that trust in ways that would leave lifelong scars. For Richard Office, the charges were even graver. His actions not only violated the law but defied basic human decency. He faced charges of aggravated child abuse, sexual assault, and exploitation of minors. The evidence against him was damning. Detailed accounts from the victims, forensic findings, and corroborating witness testimony painted a clear picture of his guilt. Unlike Morgan, Office showed no remorse throughout the trial. His cold and unrepentant demeanor further fueled public outrage. When the verdict was delivered, it was met with a sense of relief. Richard Office was sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge described his crimes as heinous and inexcusable, stating that his imprisonment was necessary to ensure he would never harm another child. The life sentence was a reflection of the irreversible harm he caused to two innocent children, and it sent a strong message about the consequences of such actions. While the legal system delivered justice, the emotional scars left on the victims, their family, and the community were immeasurable. For the two young girls, their mother's betrayal and Office's abuse had created a deep sense of loss and trauma. They were placed in protective care, surrounded by professionals dedicated to helping them heal, but the journey ahead was long and uncertain. The community, too, was left grappling with the events. How could something so horrific happen in their midst? The case served as a wake-up call, sparking conversations about the importance of vigilance in identifying and reporting abuse. It highlighted the need for stronger support systems. The sentences handed down to Morgan Summerlin and Richard Office were significant not just in their severity but also in their message. Morgan's 20-year sentence reflected the court's recognition of her betrayal as a mother, while Office's life sentence ensured that he would never again have the opportunity to harm another child. Yet, for many, these sentences, while just, could never undo the damage caused. The pain endured by the victims and the trust broken would linger for years, serving as a sobering reminder of the devastating consequences of addiction, neglect, and exploitation. The story of Morgan Summerlin and her daughters is more than just a tragic tale of betrayal and abuse. It serves as a stark reminder of the far-reaching consequences of addiction and the urgent need to protect vulnerable children. This case revealed the devastating impact addiction can have, not just on the individual struggling with it, but on those closest to them, especially children who rely on their parents for safety and guidance. Morgan's choices were driven by her dependency on drugs, but addiction alone cannot fully explain the betrayal of her daughters. It is a reminder that untreated substance abuse, combined with a lack of support and resources, can lead to decisions that harm others in irreparable ways. Addiction is a disease, but when left unchecked, it creates ripple effects that can destroy families and lives. This case forces us to look closely at how addiction is addressed in society and how critical it is to provide early intervention for those struggling with it. For the two young girls, their lives were shaped by circumstances beyond their control. They were innocent victims, caught in a situation where the very person they trusted the most, their mother, became the one who put them in harm's way. This highlights the vulnerability of children in homes affected by neglect, addiction, or abuse. It also reminds us of the importance of vigilance in protecting children. Often, signs of abuse or neglect are subtle and can go unnoticed by those around them. This case serves as a call to action for everyone, teachers, neighbors, community members, and even strangers, to pay attention to warning signs and speak up when something seems wrong. A single act of reporting can make all the difference in saving a child from a dangerous situation. The broader takeaway from this case is the need for a collective effort to prevent such tragedies from happening again. First and foremost, we must ensure that children have safe environments to grow up in. This means providing support for struggling families, ensuring access to addiction treatment programs, and strengthening community resources that offer guidance and intervention. Organizations dedicated to preventing child abuse and exploitation play a vital role, but they cannot do it alone. It takes a society-wide commitment to ensure no child endures the horrors that Morgan's daughters went through. Supporting these organizations, whether through donations, volunteering, or advocacy, can create a stronger safety net for at-risk children. In addition, raising awareness about the realities of addiction and its effects can help reduce stigma and encourage those in need to seek help sooner. Education about the signs of abuse, neglect, and trafficking must be part of community conversations to empower people to act when they see a child in danger. While this case is heartbreaking, it also offers an opportunity to learn and do better. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about addiction, abuse, and neglect, but it also gives us a chance to make meaningful changes. The story of Morgan Summerlin's daughters must not be forgotten. Instead, it should inspire us to create a world where children are safe, cared for, and allowed to thrive. Every step we take toward preventing child abuse, supporting families in crisis, and addressing addiction helps build a better future for children. Let this story remind us all that protecting the most vulnerable among us is not just a duty, it is a moral responsibility. These two young girls endured a level of trauma that no child should ever have to face. Despite their age and the unimaginable pain they went through, they found the courage to speak out. Their bravery not only exposed the terrible truth, but also ensured that those responsible would face justice. Their resilience in the face of such darkness is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Even in the most heartbreaking situations, these girls stood tall and shared their voices, not just to protect themselves, but to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Their courage reminds us that even in the most vulnerable moments, there is strength. Let their story serve as a wake-up call for all of us. These young girls deserve more than just our sympathy. They deserve our commitment to creating a safer world for every child. Their story, though tragic, is a powerful reminder of the need for vigilance, compassion, and action. We owe it to them and to every child to ensure that their safety is never compromised. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to this story. It's not an easy story to tell, but it's an important one. Stories like these demand our attention because they highlight the changes we need to make as a society to protect our most vulnerable. If you found this story impactful, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel for more stories that matter. By staying informed and sharing these stories, we can bring awareness to these issues and work together to make a difference. Let's remember these brave young girls and allow their voices to inspire us to take action, whether by supporting organizations that combat abuse, reporting signs of danger, or simply being a source of love and care in a child's life. Together, we can create a world where every child is safe, loved, and free to live without fear. Thank you again for your support. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story with others. Let's keep these conversations alive because every small step we take can lead to a better future. Together, we can make a difference.